After months of wedding planning, I told my fiancé I didn't want his boss at our wedding. That night, he said, "She's too important. I can't just uninvite her." I sat there heart pounding, wondering if he even heard me. I still loved him, but that love was starting to cost me more than I could carry. That night, I sat awake beside him, realizing the real question wasn't should she be at the wedding. It was should I? This morning, I stared at the venue cancellation button. Should I call off my wedding because of my fiancé's boss? Not really. Not the whole story. Not the way it actually felt. Sure, I vented to a couple close friends, hinted at the tension, brushed the surface with a vague "it's complicated" when people asked how wedding planning was going. But what I haven't said out loud, the part that's been eating away at me, is that I think I made a mistake getting engaged. Or maybe the mistake was thinking he saw me the same way I saw him. I never thought I'd be the kind of person asking that question. And yet, here I am. His name is Josh. He's 31. Charming in that easygoing, can talk to anyone kind of way. The kind of guy you bring home and your parents instantly adore. The kind of guy who somehow remembers your childhood dog's birthday and buys your mom flowers on her retirement day, even when you forgot. We met through mutual friends at a summer barbecue 5 years ago, during the humid blur of late July. He told this story about accidentally texting his boss a gif of a dancing llama instead of a chart update, and I couldn't stop laughing. But it wasn't just that. It was how he laughed at himself, warm and open, like someone who didn't take life too seriously, but took people seriously. Back then, I was 26, and honestly, I was exhausted. Exhausted from almost and mixed signals, from guys who made grand gestures and disappeared just as fast. Josh was the calm in all that noise. He showed up when he said he would, he asked real questions, and waited for real answers. He took my car to get serviced without me asking, stocked my fridge when I was too busy with finals, and when my grandma passed away that winter, he sat with me in silence for hours, just holding my hand. He was the first person who made me feel like I didn't have to chase love or prove I deserved it. We've been through a lot together, more than most couples our age. We met when we were both broke and stressed, juggling side gigs and student loans. I still remember splitting ramen and frozen Trader Joe's pizza in our tiny apartment with the leaky faucet and creaky floorboards. We survived career changes, a cross-country move, a 6-month long-distance phase when his job took him to Chicago. Through every challenge he was steady, loving, present. So when he proposed last fall, during a weekend trip to the mountains, I didn't hesitate, not even for a second. We were standing on a lookout point as the sun began to dip behind the trees, and he pulled out this simple, elegant ring, exactly my style, which of course he knew. He didn't make a big speech. He just looked at me with those soft, serious eyes and said, "I can't imagine the rest of my life without you." And that was it. That was all I needed. He called when he said he would. He remembered my dog's name. He didn't make me guess how he felt. Josh has always been the kind of man other women call a unicorn. The man who listens, who texts back, who remembers little details, and supports your dreams without making them feel like competition. My friends would often say, "You hit the jackpot," and I believed them. I still do. There's never been a part of me that doubted his goodness. He wasn't flashy, but he was dependable in the kind of way that makes you feel safe, loved, like you finally come home. But lately, I find myself thinking back to that moment and wondering if I mistook consistency for commitment. Because now, months away from our wedding, I feel lonelier than I did when I was single. And the person I should be able to talk to, my future husband, is the one I can't bring myself to confront. And Josh clearly admired her. Not just admired, he respected her, looked up to her. Aubrey was his manager, the one who had pushed for his promotion last year, the one who gave him space to lead important projects and pitched his name in meetings with senior leadership. She was more than a boss. She was a mentor, a guide, and at some point without me fully realizing it, his emotional confidant. I even met her once, back when things still felt secure. Josh invited me to grab drinks after work with his team, and Aubrey was there. She was confident in that effortless, magnetic way, sharp-witted, poised. The kind of woman who could walk into any room and command it without saying a word. She had this quiet elegance about her, but you could tell she was also the kind of person who didn't hesitate to speak her mind. Beautiful in an understated but undeniable way. She looked like someone who always knew exactly who she was. She knew when we were having a tough week. Josh once told me, he vented to her after one of our arguments, and she helped him see things more clearly. At the time, I nodded, grateful he had someone he could talk to. But now, that memory stings, because the woman who helped him work through our problems was the same woman I now felt was wedging herself between us. I wanted to be chill. I wanted to be trusting. I told myself I had nothing to worry about, and for a while I didn't. But slowly, subtly, something shifted. Still, that night at the bar she was surprisingly warm to me. We talked about books, and she laughed at my stories about college mishaps. We even exchanged social media handles that night and followed each other on Facebook. I remember thinking, wow, she's actually pretty cool. Josh wasn't merely impressed by her opinions. He started quoting her in conversations at home. Aubrey says that's the best sushi spot in the city, or Aubrey thinks I should go for that new internal position. Her name was everywhere, like a watermark across our shared life. Then came the texts, late at night, while we were lying in bed. At first he'd show me what she wrote, some inside joke or meme. We'd laugh together, but soon the phone stayed angled away. Sometimes he'd smile and type quickly, not saying a word. When I asked what was funny, he'd just say, inside joke. That's when the distance started. Not in any dramatic movie-style way. No yelling, no betrayals, no big confessions. Just this slow, quiet unraveling. A subtle retreat. The kind of distance you can't point to but feel. Like a draft under a door. I would catch myself watching him across the dinner table, noticing how often he smiled at his phone, how rarely our conversations went beyond surface-level exchanges. I felt like I was slowly being edged out, like the walls of our relationship were quietly shrinking, making room for someone else. And I wasn't even sure if he noticed. I tried to reason with myself. They work together. She's his manager, of course they spend a lot of time together. They're close because of necessity, not emotion. I told myself that over and over. I clung to logic like it could drown out intuition. But then the comments started. Small remarks, so subtle they felt like nothing until they piled up and became everything. And that's exactly what stung. Not just the comments but the truth buried beneath them, that this woman, who I didn't choose to be in my life, seemed to know more about the man I loved than I did. It felt like there were parts of Josh I had never been allowed to see, parts he reserved for her, and what made it worse was how easily he dismissed my discomfort. If I brought it up, he'd say she's just being helpful, or worse, you're reading into things. Little things that felt like paper cuts. She'd suggest venues, ones that didn't match our style. But Josh would say, Aubrey thinks that one's more me. She once made a comment about my dress choice, something like, oh, Josh usually hates lace, like she knew his taste better than I did, and maybe she does. I tried to reason with myself. They work together. She's his manager, of course they spend a lot of time together. They're close because of necessity, not emotion. I told myself that over and over. I clung to logic like it could drown out intuition. But then the comments started. Small remarks, so subtle they felt like nothing until they piled up and became everything. Little things that felt like paper cuts. She'd suggest venues, ones that didn't match our style. But Josh would say, Aubrey thinks that one's more me. She once made a comment about my dress choice, something like, oh, Josh usually hates lace, like she knew his taste better than I did, and maybe she does. And that's exactly what stung. Not just the comments but the truth buried beneath them, that this woman, who I didn't choose to be in my life, seemed to know more about the man I loved than I did. It felt like there were parts of Josh I had never been allowed to see, parts he reserved for her, and what made it worse was how easily he dismissed my discomfort. If I brought it up, he'd say she's just being helpful, or worse, you're reading into things. So I started to doubt myself, question my own perception. Maybe I was overthinking, maybe I was jealous. I told myself not to be petty, not to be insecure. I didn't want to be the clingy fiancé who couldn't handle a strong woman in her partner's orbit. I wanted to be modern, unbothered, cool. But inside, I was unraveling. I would lie awake next to him at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every comment, every look, every smile he gave her. I rehearsed conversations in my head, what I'd say, how I'd say it, how he might respond. I imagined every version of the fight, and in most of them, I was the one apologizing for bringing it up. How do you explain to someone that it's not about one moment? It's not just the texts, or the jokes, or even the suggestions. It's the erosion of intimacy. It's realizing you no longer know which version of your partner is the real one, the one with you, or the one who lights up when he talks about someone else. It's about how invisible you feel in your own relationship. The night of our engagement party was when everything cracked. I'd been dreading that evening in a low-key way, which I told myself was just nerves. I wore a navy dress that Josh once said made my eyes pop. I curled my hair even though I hate doing it. I wanted to feel like myself, just a shinier version. And for the first hour or so, it was fine. Friends, family, drinks, laughter. But then Aubrey showed up, 30 minutes late, with a bottle of expensive champagne and a voice that carried across the room. She went straight to Josh, kissed his cheek, and handed him the champagne like they were co-hosts. I watched from across the room as he grinned, pulled her into a side hug, and whispered something in her ear that made her laugh. I told myself to breathe, be gracious. She's his manager, she's just being supportive. But every time I tried to join a conversation they were having, I was met with a wall of inside jokes, stories from work, shared glances I couldn't decode. I felt like an extra in my own celebration, like I'd wandered into the wrong party. And then the comment. But it wasn't just the comment. Earlier in the night, as I was talking with my cousin near the patio doors, I watched Aubrey take Josh's hand and drag him toward the photo booth. Not ask, drag. She pulled him by the wrist with the kind of ease and familiarity that made my stomach drop. A few people noted. Someone even joked, "Looks like the real couple of the night," and they laughed. She didn't correct them. Josh didn't either. They posed for photos, just the two of them, arms slung over each other, her head tilted against his shoulder like they were on the cover of some engagement announcement. When I approached a few minutes later, she turned to me with this sweet, performative smile and said, "Don't worry, I'm just borrowing him for a bit." Borrowing. Like he was hers to take, whenever she pleased. I tried to keep smiling. I tried not to let my voice shake when I said, "Sure, of course." But inside, I felt this deep, gnawing ache, like a crack forming somewhere too deep to. And then came the final blow. I was walking toward them with a refill of Josh's drink when I heard her say, "If you ever change your mind, you know you could always marry me instead." She laughed. He laughed. I froze. Not because I thought he was cheating, but because in that moment, I realized something worse, that if he ever did decide to walk away from me, there was already someone waiting in the wings who he clearly adored, someone who didn't seem to care that I was right there wearing a ring he gave me, hosting a party meant to celebrate our life together. I confronted him later that night, quietly, no drama, just us in the car, parked in our driveway, the party still echoing in my head and the weight of that moment pressing heavy on my chest. "I don't think what she said was funny," I told him, trying to sound calm even though my hands were clenched in my lap. He looked genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" "That thing Aubrey said, about marrying her." He shrugged. "Claire, she was obviously kidding." "Were you?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "What? When you laughed, were you kidding too? Or did you like it?" He stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "You're reading way too much into this. You're blowing it out of proportion." "No," I said, trying not to cry. "I'm reacting to how it made me feel. And how it made me feel was replaced, disrespected, humiliated." Josh shook his head and turned to look out the window. "It wasn't a big deal. You're being jealous over nothing." I swallowed hard, heart pounding. "It's not nothing to me. She flirted with you at our engagement party. She touched you like she owned you. She acted like I wasn't even there. She's just like that," he said. "She jokes around. She doesn't mean anything by it." "Josh," I whispered, "do you even hear yourself? You're defending her more than you're listening to me." He went quiet, jaw tense. So I pushed further. "If this were flipped, if one of my male coworkers had touched me the way she touched you, joked about marrying me, and posed with me like we were a couple at our party, would you still say it was just a joke?" He didn't answer right away. His silence was long, heavy, and in that silence, something in me shifted. And when I finally said the words, "I don't want her at the wedding," he looked at me like I'd betrayed him. "You know, I can't do that," he said slowly. "She's my boss, Claire. Uninviting her would be career suicide." I stared at him, stunned. "So, your job is more important than how I feel on our wedding day?" "I didn't say that. But that's what you meant." He opened his mouth like he was going to protest, but no words came out. And maybe that silence was an answer all on its own. A few days after the engagement party, things between Josh and me felt off. Not explosive, not cold. Exactly, just quiet. Too quiet. Like both of us were tiptoeing around a subject neither of us wanted to be the first to revisit. He wasn't distant, but he wasn't quite present either, and I found myself analyzing every text, every gesture, like a detective in a mystery I didn't ask to solve. One night, I came home from work to find him cooking dinner, something he rarely did unless it was a special occasion. He greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes and poured me a glass of wine before I could even take off my coat. It should have felt romantic. Instead, it felt like a peace offering. We made small talk, work, weather, the latest episode of a show we used to love but hadn't watched together in weeks. I waited, thinking maybe he'd bring it up, but he didn't. So I did. "Have you thought about what I said?" He paused, mid-sip, then put his glass down. "About Aubrey?" I nodded. He exhaled slowly. "Claire, I get that you're uncomfortable. I really do, but uninviting her would be a big deal. She's not just anyone. She's a key figure at my company. People talk, and she's helped me so much. I can't just turn around and treat her like an outsider." "She made me feel like an outsider," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "At our own engagement party." Josh looked down at his plate. "She didn't mean it that way, but it felt that way." Silence stretched between us. I could hear the ticking of the clock in the kitchen, the soft hum of the dishwasher. Then he looked up and for a moment he was the Josh I fell in love with. Gentle, sincere, steady. I'm not choosing her over you, he said quietly. I'm trying to keep everything from falling apart. And that was the heart of it, wasn't it? He wanted to keep the peace. At work, at home, in his own mind. But sometimes, you can't have peace without choosing sides. And what if the side you choose tells the other person exactly where they stand? That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to his breathing beside me, wondering if love was supposed to feel like a compromise that left you quietly grieving. The next morning, I called in sick. I needed time to think, to breathe. I spent most of the day walking around the city, past the coffee shop where we had our first date, past the bridge, where he first told me he loved me. Everything looked the same, but I felt like a stranger in my own memory. I found myself standing outside a bridal boutique I hadn't visited yet. I went in, hoping maybe trying on a dress would bring back the excitement. Instead, I stood in front of the mirror, veil in hand, and saw a woman trying to convince herself she still believed in the future she planned. I didn't buy the dress. I didn't go home right away either. Because the question wasn't just whether Aubrey should be at our wedding. The real question was whether I should. The argument that night had stuck to my ribs like something heavy and unfinished. Josh wasn't cruel, but he was firm, and beneath every explanation he gave, there was something else: frustration. Not just at me, but at the bind he was in. I could see it in his face, in the way his shoulders sagged every time I brought up her name. He felt trapped, and maybe, to be fair, he was. But I couldn't help wondering why his instinct was to protect her reputation instead of protecting me. I need her there, he'd said again the night before. She's been instrumental in everything I've achieved. If she's not at the wedding, people will talk. They'll assume something happened. It's not just about me. It's about my standing, my future. And what about our future? I'd asked. Do you care how I feel, or are you just trying to save face? He didn't answer that one. Instead, he sighed and muttered something about how I was putting him in an impossible position, and maybe I was. But wasn't he doing the same to me? I was stuck between two versions of myself, the woman who wanted to believe in Josh, and the woman who couldn't ignore that her instincts had been screaming for weeks. Was I being dramatic? Was I blowing things out of proportion? Or was I finally seeing the cracks I hadn't wanted to see? I sat alone in a park for hours that afternoon, just watching the wind push through the trees, wondering how something as beautiful as a wedding could start to feel like a trap. I thought about how I'd always imagined that in a moment of doubt your partner would pull you closer, not push you further away. But here I was, questioning everything alone. And when I replayed his words in my head, she's helped me so much, people will talk, I can't treat her like an outsider. I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit, that I already felt like the outsider. So no, it wasn't just about her. It was about what her presence represented. The version of Josh who lit up for someone else. The version of me who was shrinking to keep the peace. But even as that thought settled over me, it didn't come with clarity. It came with more questions. What if I was wrong? What if this was just a rough patch and I walked away from a good man who was just trying to keep things from falling apart? What if, a year from now, I looked back and regretted it all? And as I stared at the blank screen of my phone, my fingers hovering over the text that would cancel our venue appointment, I realized something else. Maybe it wasn't too late to choose myself. And yet, what if I didn't? What if this ache in my chest, this persistent sense of being unseen, was something I'd carry forever if I stayed silent now? What if this wasn't just about one wedding guest, but about what kind of partnership I was agreeing to for the rest of my life? I didn't have an answer yet, not one I could live with. But I knew this. I couldn't move forward pretending like nothing was broken. Something was, and I was finally ready to sit with that truth, however uncomfortable, however uncertain. So I didn't cancel the venue, but I didn't confirm it either. For now, I'm just here, waiting, thinking, wondering if choosing love means holding on, or knowing when to let